want to, just in case you want to listen to it again, or if we ever see a need to let somebody else listen in on this. So, so just to let you know, we'll have it recorded. Okay, so what we're here today for is to give you all, the state of Connecticut, a detailed training on the health and safety audit. And both Minnie and I will be doing this. And what we're going to, so we weren't certain how long it's going to take to do this. We were originally thinking it might take 2 days, 2 hours today and 2 hours tomorrow. But since most of you all, or all of you all, have actually gotten into the software and have played around with it, then we might not have to do some of the training on the weatherization assistant part of it, the user and the agency and the account and all that stuff. So we might be able to get it done today, okay? We'll just play it by ear, okay? So let's just see how far we get through this. So any questions?
Nope, not yet.
Not yet.
All right. So I'm going to leave you all unmuted. So if you just have a question, since it's just, the three of us basically, the three, sites, Minnie's on hers, and then you all together. If you have a question, just jump on in and we'll answer it. So what I wanted to do is just give you a brief overview of what the health and safety audit is and how it was developed, kind of before we go into some of the more details of how to actually program it. And some of y'all, depending on if you've been at any of the recent NASCAPS meetings or something, you might have seen these, but there's not many slides here. So the health and safety audit is basically an integration of two documents. It's an integration of this EPA document, this Healthy Indoor Environment Protocols for Home Energy Upgrades. EPA came up with this document, and when we finally got into the guts of how we were going to program up a health and safety audit, this document basically formed the primary basis for what we ended up programming and putting into the software. And that is combined or supplemented with Weatherization Program Notice 11.6, which came out in 2011 from DOE, from the Weatherization Program on health and safety guidance. So our software is kind of a combination of these two, or a merging of these two. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next 20 or 30 minutes. Now, I do realize that DOE has come out with some new guidance just in the last couple months, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, okay?
Okay.
So what was the purpose? So the purpose of the health and safety audit was basically to assess the impact of existing conditions on planned weatherization work, and to assess the impact of planned weatherization work on the health and safety of occupants and crew members. And it's really, so it's assessing existing conditions and then the impact that might have on planned weatherization work, and then looking at it backwards, what the planned work might have, what impact it might have on the health and safety of occupants and crews. And from that, we kind of developed three types of recommendations. We have recommendations that remediate existing health and safety problems that are found in the house. We have recommendations on things that need to be done to perform the weatherization work in a healthy and safe manner. And we have recommendations for preventing any future problems based on the assessment of the house and what weatherization work is going to be done to the house. And what we ended up doing in our health and safety audit is putting all of our stuff, basically, all of our inputs and all of our recommendations, we organized that in 9 categories. mold and moisture, lead, radon, asbestos, formaldehyde, and VOCs. Combustion byproducts, meaning if it has combustion systems in it, we have some forms that we then look at. Pest infestation, safety, and ventilation. You kind of go back to these two documents that we used as a basis for this audit. This document maybe has 20 categories. The WPN, the original WAP guidance had 15 or 20 categories. We kind of merged those into these 9. So these are our 9 categories. And the way that the health and safety audit is designed is this. There's a few what we call general survey forms. There's about 3 of them that get you started. And these forms, on these forms, you kind of identify the basic dwelling type and the location of the house and its construction. And then there's one form that kind of assesses occupants and their health conditions. And then there's a third form that there's a quick assessment, a visual assessment of the house and any existing problems that you might see in a very quick walk around of the house. And from these inputs, then what happens is the audit recommends which detailed survey forms should be filled in. And so basically in this process of what the audit does is it looks at the inputs that you put in on these first couple forms. It makes a quick assessment of existing or potential health and safety issues. And from that assessment, it gives kind of a recommendation on which of these detailed survey inputs should be completed by an auditor. And basically what there is there's basically 1 or 2 detailed forms for every one of these categories. Some of them there's not 2 forms, so there's 9 categories. If there were 2 forms for each, that would be 18 forms, but there's not 2 for every one of them. So there's between 9 and 18 detailed survey forms that an auditor can fill out. And what happens is this is just our recommendation. If we recommend that you don't need to fill out the radon form, an auditor can still fill it out on their own if they want to. So all we're trying to do is to give some guidance as to which of these sets of forms an auditor needs to fill out on a house, but they can supersede that recommendation and either fill out forms that weren't recommended, or if we recommend a form but that's not part of a state's or your program, then you don't have to fill it out. On the detailed forms, there's basically a whole lot of check boxes. And the check boxes, as you've probably seen, allow you to log in what you visually see about what the severity of a problem is, or to say what the source of the problem is. So, for example, you might talk about mold and moisture, there being a problem in a certain place, and then you go to another form and say, oh, and the source of that is that the kitchen fan isn't running, or there's a leak in the roof, or something like that. So most of the forms deal with just check boxes and checklists identifying things visually. But on some of the forms, there's also input fields that allow you to enter measured results, primarily on the ventilation form and the combustion form, although, for example, you can also enter a radon measurement on the radon form. So there are places to put in measurements into the detailed survey forms, and then we use those numbers as part of the logic to make recommendations upon. And once you've filled out all the detailed survey forms, you hit the run button, and basically we provide recommendations on how to remediate existing issues or how to prevent problems from occurring either into the future or as part of weatherization. And then what we do is, and in the results, we do provide some quantitative results. If we, for example, on the ventilation, if you filled in the ventilation form, we will say what size fan is needed to provide whole house ventilation to meet ASHRAE standard 62.2. And then what we also have on the recommendation form is a way of saying, first of all, does the problem that's been identified, does it need to be done before you can actually do weatherization work? And an auditor basically has to look at that recommendation and make that determination on their own, although in some cases we do provide some guidance to the auditor as to how to make that determination. And then as part of the recommendation form, there's also a method for the auditor to say, who's going to do this recommendation? Are we going to do it as part of our program, or are we going to tell the homeowner or the client that they have to fix it before we can come in and do our work? Or are we going to refer this to some other program to try to do before we do our work? So there's just kind of a little process there to help the auditor think through who's going to do this work. And that's kind of how the audit's designed. Fill in the initial couple forms, get a recommendation as to which of the detailed forms to fill out, fill those detailed forms out, and then get the recommendations and decide when does it have to be done and who's going to do it. And that's kind of shown on this. This is the recommendation form. And we'll go over this recommendation form several more times in the next couple hours. But basically, there is a tab for each of those 9 health and safety categories that I talked about: mold and moisture, lead, all the way down to ventilation. And what happens on this recommendation form is here's the actual recommendation that resulted from your input on the detailed survey forms. There's 2 of them in this example for mold and moisture. You can kind of see over here that there's 4 also recommendations for safety. And then for the rest of the tabs, there's zeros, which means there weren't any recommendations for lead, radon, asbestos, all these other categories. So here's the recommendations. And then what happens is there's some guidance that we list down here that an auditor can look at if they want to. On every one of these categories, on every health and safety category, we always have some notes on how to make this specifically applicable to the DOE Weatherization Assistance Program. And I'll talk more about that, but that is kind of stuff coming out of the WAP WPN 11-7 guidance. And then on some of the forms, there's also some other guidance. For mold and moisture, I think we provided some guidance on, hey, if you got some mold and moisture issues, we provide some guidance on whether it needs to be addressed before the house is weatherized, or if it can be taken care of during or after the house is weatherized. That doesn't happen on every form, but I think on mold and moisture there is some guidance to help the auditor make that decision. So that's kind of what this recommendation form looks like, and I'll show you a live version of it later, and then Minnie will go over it again a third time later in the presentation. So with that quick overview, again, remember that this health and safety audit was primarily based on this EPA document. And I think I sent you some kind of a PDF, right, James? With that document, of that document. Did you get that?
Yeah, we're all familiar with this document.
Okay.
We use this to guide other programs.
Yep. Okay. So I'm in our presentation here. I just showed you one part. So this was, if you go into that document and you look up asbestos, this is kind of how they organize things. For every health and safety issue in this document, they have a column of how do you assess the issue, and then they have 2 columns for what's the minimum action and the expanded action. And basically what we did is we took all this information and we used it to program up this health and safety audit. So if you go into this thing and look up asbestos and look at our asbestos form, under our detailed survey forms, you'll see a lot of these things that are talked about under this assessment protocol column. Look at the attic insulation for vermiculite, and you'll see a lot of this stuff. And then in our recommendations, what we did is we looked at the recommendations of how they were, what they were coming up with, what EPA was coming up with, and basically we programmed up these actions as recommendations. So you might get a little insight if you kind of look through this EPA protocol. You'll see a lot of the stuff when you get more familiar with our audit as to if you look at these tables, you'll see a lot of the, how we pulled stuff from these tables and use that to program up our health and safety audit. And again, as we've said, the audit is basically a combination of this EPA document and the Weatherization Program Notice 11.6. So you should certainly be familiar with WPN 11.6. Now, when DOE came out with this, here's the WPN. It was about 6 or 8 pages or something with a table in it. And we certainly used information in there to develop the audit. But what we probably used more of is DOE had a slide presentation, a big training session that they used to teach people about how to use WPN 11-6. The title of it was WAP Health and Safety. It doesn't have any more title than that. But in this PowerPoint, they ended up having like a slide on all their different issues. I just kind of showed you one, mold and moisture. And they have things that, what's allowed, what's required, and what's restricted. And what happened is we took a lot of these words, these sentences out of this training, and that's what shows up on our recommendation form in this area where we said we had notes about how to make it applicable to the Weatherization Assistance Program. We got all these words, all these sentences, we pulled them from basically this DOE training which they put together to train people on how to implement this WPN 11.6. So that's where a lot of that came from. And that's kind of how we merged the EPA document in with the Weatherization Program through these notes. Now, there are, in our program logic, there is a little bit of logic that's based on the Weatherization Assistance Program rules and the guidance that's in this 11-6, but it's a little bit more limited. Most of the logic in the audit is based on this EPA document, and so most of the DOE emphasis or logic got integrated into the audit through these notes that appear on the recommendation forms. So you ought to be familiar certainly with 11.6, and I don't know if you've ever seen this training. If you want to look at it, I can give it to you. But the other thing that you ought to look at if you want to kind of understand the health and safety audit is to look at that design manual that I sent you a copy of. Because in that design manual, what we do is for all 9 of our categories, of our health and safety categories, we first of all show you, on the general survey, those first 3 forms, what information we take from those first 3 forms to tell you whether you should fill out the detailed form for, say, in this example, for lead. So in the design manual, we show you for every category, for every health and safety issue, how we take this general information off the first 3 forms and develop these recommendations as to whether you should fill out the detailed form for that category or not. For lead, it's based heavily on what year the house was built. And based on that and a few other things regarding planned weatherization work, you can see that we say, well, this form probably isn't applicable to this house because it was built after 1978. But sometimes it is recommended based on when it was built and if you're planning on doing weatherization work. Then in the manual, what we also do is we have a flow chart for every health and safety issue. So for mold and moisture, radon, lead, formaldehyde, safety, what we do is we have this big kind of a flow chart. And what the flow chart shows you is how we take all the information that's collected on the detailed form, in this example for lead, and how we analyze it to come up with the recommendations that we come up with. So basically, you should look through this design manual at this part of the manual, and what you can see, for example, for lead, is you can see all the recommendations that we can generate for lead, and I think there's 6 of them. Okay. For other topics like the general safety, there's maybe 50 recommendations that could be made. And I think for mold and moisture, there's a lot more than 6. But for lead, there's basically 6 recommendations that we make. So you should use the design manual to see, I think in total there's about 100 to 200 health and safety recommendations that we can make. And if you want to see all the recommendations that the audit can make, if you go into the design manual and look at each chapter for each of the 9 categories, you can see then all the recommendations that the audit can come up with. And if you want to, you can work backwards and see what data are used and what the logic is to come up with these recommendations. And as I said, most of this logic is based on the EPA document, although we do throw in a little bit of logic based on weatherization activity and weatherization rules. And then the last handout or document that you should be familiar with is that Getting Started guideline that we sent out to you when we did the multi-training. But I think I resent it out to you just in the last couple days, because it does have a quick introduction with an overview of the health and safety audit on the second page. It does go over how to log into the weatherization assistant and the general layout of the thing and how to use the user and agency forms and the account form. And then at the end of this Getting Started guideline, there's about 5 pages on specifically how do you kind of get started with the health and safety audit, which is kind of what we're going to go over in the next hour and a half here. So you ought to be familiar with that Getting Started guideline too. That'll help you get started on using the audit, which you probably already have looked at since you've been playing around with it. So the last thing I just want to quickly just go over before we kind of move into actually looking at the audit live is as part of the audit, we have three sets of reports. We have an audit input report that basically just spits back out all the input that you put in for an audit on a given house. So there's basically a cover page that gives you some general information, and then this is just an example of how we show you what you entered on the pest infestation form. And it's not, you can't read this or anything, but you can kind of see that somebody must have checked this box, this one, and this one. So this report just gives you back everything that you've entered on the computer for this house, for the health and safety audit, in case you want to print it out and put it into your kind of, written records. We also have an audit results report that basically, again, has a cover sheet, and then there's basically a page or 2 for every category. It looks very similar to the form that shows up on your computer screen that summarizes the results of the audit. And this is just a way to print it out, the results. And then many put together a data collection report. So we have a collection report or a collection form that you can print out and you can use this if you go out in the field and don't type things in directly on a computer. You can take these sheets of paper out, collect all the information that's needed for the audit, and then come back in and type it back into the audit when you get back to your office. So that's kind of a quick overview of the health and safety audit. And before we now go into the details, any questions at this point or anything?
No, we're good.
We're good.
Okay. So, so here's where, if we were training absolutely new users, we would spend a little time, say about an hour, going over what this web-based weatherization assistant looks like, how to use the agency form, the user form, and how to use and enter an account, because you need to kind of understand all this before you can really get in and do the health and safety audit. But since you all went through the multi-training, I think that's correct. Is that right?
Not everyone did, Mark, but again, we've been working here specifically with the health and safety audit, and again, we feel like we've got to a point where we're functional.
That's right. So at this point, I'm not really going to go over any of this. I'm assuming you kind of got it understood. If you have any questions on any of these things, just call me and I can talk about the agency form or the user form or how to set up an account. So what we're going to just focus on for the rest of the time is kind of going into the details now in a second of the health and safety audit itself, and that's what we're going to get into.
Right.
So what I'm going to do quickly here is I'm going to log into the audit. And you all know how to do this, I'm assuming. You've been playing around with it.
Yeah.
Yep.
You can't see my password. So all I'm going to do is just kind of, just to reiterate, right now you all are connected to the same agency, I think. So you probably have set up some information under agency. I'm logged in under our agency, where we just called it the ORNL agency. And the user form, so there's just some information, general description here that shows up, what your agency name is, and if you want to, you can put in all this address stuff. If you want to add or delete users, you do that under this user form. I think I basically set most of you up on already with, your own username and password. But depending on what I think I gave you guys agency administrator privileges, so you can add and delete users in your agency if you want to. When we really get this set up going at the state level, as people at the state, what you'll do is you'll be able to create agencies and then create users within those agencies to get them started. And when we set you up with your own database, I'll show you how to do that, okay? And then, as you probably know, to start an audit, you have to fill in an account first, okay? And the account, basically, you enter this information in this upper block. What agency is this house being worked on under? What's the account name and what's the number? You can enter other numbers and addresses. The rest of this you don't need to fill out, but you kind of have to fill this in first before you can actually go over here then and create an audit for that account. But I think you probably have figured all that out already. So I'm just going to go into this health and safety audit, and I'm going to talk for about 4 more minutes here, and then I'm going to turn it over to Minnie. And all I want to say is Minnie's going to go over the details of all these forms. I'm just going to point out that in the health and safety audit, just like in multi, there is what we call an audit doc over here. And what the audit doc allows you to see, as you know, is up here in this upper block, you're seeing general information about the audit that you're currently working on. Now, as a default, when you first open the health and safety audit, you're brought automatically to this audit page where all this information is shown here. But as you start to work through the audit, let's say you go down here to this mold and moisture form, and you're looking at the mold and moisture form, If you forgot what audit you're working on, well, it's all summarized up here still. You're working on audit 1268. It was called the Davison audit, blah, blah, blah. You use this audit doc to navigate to all the forms. You use this audit doc to run the audit. And once you've run the audit, you can use this view button to see the audit that you've run, what the results are. If you click on create, it will overwrite whatever you've done before. So right now we've built in that if you've already run the audit and click create, it'll give you a warning that says, hey, you've already run the audit once. Are you sure you want to rerun it? If you say yes, it'll erase everything that you've done before and rerun the audit and give you a new set of recommendations. I'm going to say no because I don't want to overwrite it. And then in this audit doc is the place here for these reports. You can get the audit input report or the result report or this data collection form that I talked about. Okay, so for example, if you click on audit input, this is, you get this input report for this audit of all the inputs that you entered into the audit. If you run the audit, then you can look at the results or print them out here, and this is the data collection form. So the last thing I'm going to do is just reiterate here. I'm going to click this view, and it's kind of, I found in these trainings, to talk a little bit more about the recommendation form first, because this is what you're trying to get to. So I'm going to just kind of go over this one more time, and then Minnie's going to start talking about all the detailed forms that generates this recommendation form. And at the end, if we want to talk about this recommendation form some more, we can. But again, basically the recommendation form is, there's tabs up here for all 9 categories of health and safety issues that we look at. Mold and moisture, lead, radon, asbestos, formaldehyde, combustion, pest, safety, and ventilation. And basically we have a detailed survey form for all 9 of those categories. So when we generate the recommendations, all the mold and moisture recommendations are given here. You can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them for this audit. And then under lead, well, we must have created, based on our input, the audit recommends 5 lead recommendations, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you can look up here at the numbers and see, oh, I've got 5 asbestos recommendations, 7 pest recommendations, and 4 ventilation recommendations. And then, as I've talked about, what we do is there's a column here that says, hey, does this thing need to be performed before the house is weatherized, or can it be performed while the house is weatherized or afterwards? The auditor has to fill this in, but it does make the auditor think through the process of saying, well, okay, if this is a health and safety issue, I need to kind of decide whether it needs to be done, if this is something that needs to be done before I can weatherize the house or not. So they can go in here and check these boxes. Check means yes. Blank means it doesn't have to be done before the house is weatherized. And then as part of the kind of recommendation thinking process, the auditor should think through, oh, who's going to implement this recommendation? So this first recommendation, for example, on mold and moisture says we need to improve the grading so that the water flows away from the house. Well, this might need to be performed before weatherization work is done, because we're going to do some exterior wall insulation. We don't want that insulation to be messed up by the first time it rains. And then we need to decide, well, who's going to do that? Now, for weatherization work, if it's going to be done under the weatherization program or whatever program is running this audit, you might check this box to say, hey, we'll implement it. Or you might say, no, this is something that we don't do, so we need to tell the client to pay for it to get it done, and when they get it done, we'll come back and then do the work. Or we might refer it to some other organization to get the work done. Or we may say, hey, we're just not going to do that measure. It's something that needs to be done, but it doesn't seem like at this point anybody's going to be able to do it, and so we're not going to get that addressed at this point in time, although we will let the homeowner know that it is a problem and they might want to think about getting it done at some point. So again, the auditor kind of makes this determination. And in some cases, we provide some guidance, I think, on how to help, some guidance to the auditor and how they would make this determination of whether this needs to be done before or after weatherization. There may be some guidance on these, but I don't really think so. I think that's just the auditor has to kind of decide who's going to do this and who, under what different programs that could get done. On every form, I had mentioned that there are these notes on what makes this or how to make this applicable to the weatherization program. So again, what we had pulled out is from that DOE training, they had talked about, for example, that mold remediation and testing is not allowed under the DOE program per se. And what they want you to do is to provide client notification on mold and moisture. And anyways, it goes through all it lists what guidance DOE had given regarding mold and moisture. So if an auditor wants to relook at that guidance, if they had forgotten something or wanted to reference it again, they can just, open it up again, read through the DOE guidance, and it might help them decide on how to fill out some of this stuff up here. For mold and moisture, there is some other guidance that we give. If you go to lead, the only guidance that we give is how to make it applicable to the weatherization program. With radon, we have those WAP guidance as well as some mitigation guidance that we've included here. So again, not all the forms have 4 different categories of guidance, but they all definitely have guidance that's related to the weatherization program. So with that, I'm going to stop. Any questions? I'm going to let Minnie take over. And what Minnie's going to do is go over all these forms with you now. Okay?
Hey.
So I'm going to stop sharing. So Minnie, you should be able to share your screen.
Okay. Do you all see the web browser with the audit?
Yep.
Audit form?
Yes, we do.
Yep. We're seeing it.
Okay. Is it legible? I mean, is the size of the fonts okay? Are you able to read properly or?
Yep, it should be
it's a
fine,
little
Minnie.
small, but I can see it.
I'm trying to zoom in. I hope.
Yeah, that's a little bit better. That's even better still.
Okay. All right. Good. Yeah. So this is the audit form. I have already created one complete audit with all the forms filled in for today's demonstration. On this audit, for health and safety audit, like Mark explained, we have this audit doc always on the left. It shows up there always, whichever form you are on, and it lets you access the individual forms. Then in the middle, we have this data input, this form, which has different field sets. Under these, there are different data input fields. Then every form will have a comment box. There is this place for buttons where on the audit form you have new, copy, and delete buttons if you want to create a new audit, or if you want to start with a copy of an existing audit, or if you want to delete an audit, you can use these buttons. For every audit form, if you have entered any data and you want to save the data, click the apply button, and it will save the data without exiting the form. If you click OK, then it will save the data, and you will exit the form. If you entered something but you don't want to save the data, you cancel, and nothing will be saved. And on the audit, just on the audit form, there is this box with a scroll button, where you can select the audit. If you have multiple audits, you can select which audit you want to work on from this list. It has most key information about the audit, and you can sort by agency, by audit name, by account name, whatever makes more sense. To create a new audit, the very first audit, you will click on this button and go to the health and safety audit if it's not already showing, because when you open this browser first, you will see the multi audit. So you click on this audit, click on the health and safety audit, and you will be brought to this health and safety audit. To create a new audit, first you go to the account form and create a new account for any new audit. You fill in all the information here. Click OK, apply to save the form. Since I have already created an account, which is this one, I'll be using this one, where I've entered the agent, selected the agency, entered the account name, account number, city, and state. Other fields are optional. After completing the account form, you go back to the audit menu and go to the view audit. Here you click, since it's a new audit, you will have to create a new audit. After you click the new button, there will be a blank form with no audit doc. You select the agency, the account name, account number will be populated. You can select by either by account name or by account number. Type in the audit name, select the audit date, select the auditor. The city, state will be automatically filled in based on your account form, information on your account form. The audit number will be filled after you have said apply. For example, here, if I say, it asks me to fill all the information, so I won't do it now. But after you've filled all the information and if you hit apply, then the audit number will be populated here. So this is all the key information about the audit. The second field set is where you enter the state for the house and the county. This county information is used for assigning the radon zone. There is a EPA map of radon zone. So if you enter this county, the audit will determine if it is in a high radon potential county or a moderate or a low radon potential county. Then you enter the weather state and weather station. Sometimes, if you are, it may happen that the house is located in one state, but the weather conditions are more closer to a weather station, which is maybe somewhere in the next state. So it doesn't have to be exactly the same state. If the weather of another location is similar to the place where the house is located, then you can select another weather state also. Then you enter the dwelling characteristics, which include conditioned floor area, average ceiling height, whether the house has attached garage, number of floors, number of bedrooms, bathrooms, year built. You scroll further down and you can enter the occupancy in the house. This is just the audit form. After you fill in, you click apply and you'll get the audit number. In the audit doc, we have 4 sets of forms: general survey, detailed form guidance, detailed survey forms, and audit recommendations. You have to fill in these set of forms first. Audit we have already covered. Fill in these forms and then see the view guidance. Click on apply, and then all these forms, the guidance will tell you which forms are recommended or required or optional. And then you fill in these forms and you get the audit recommendations after you have completed these forms. For each of these forms, there are some colored icons. These icons will tell you whether the form is required. Red means the form is required. Yellow means the form is recommended. If a green icon shows up, that means the form is optional based on all your inputs on these three forms. And if the icon is white, that means the form is not applicable. For example, if you have selected a house which is comparatively new, then you do not have to fill in the lead form. The form is will not be applicable. As you fill in each form, you save each form, these green check marks will start appearing, saying that this form is complete. Now you can move on to the next form. So we just covered the audit form. The second general survey form is health concerns form. Here there is a list of health symptoms and check boxes if the symptoms is present among the occupants. There are additional check boxes. So if you select a symptom is present, you can describe if it is a long-term illness, whether the symptom is in the vulnerable population, which is children or elderly, if it is worse at home or worse in winter. These are optional. These check boxes are not used for generating recommendations, or they do not impact in any way. It's just this set of check box, whether the symptom is present or not. This affects some of the recommendations, some of the guidance for which forms to fill. The next general survey form is observations, where we ask to fill in observations for most health and safety categories. We have these are only screening questions, and based on which ones you have checked, the audit will say this view guidance form will say whether the detailed survey form is recommended or optional or not applicable. For mold and moisture, there is a set of questions asking for the evidence of any mold and moisture issue. There are a few questions about related to lead, 2 questions about radon, a few questions about formaldehyde, evidence of formaldehyde and VOCs, 1 check box about combustion, whether the house just a question that whether the house has combustion appliances present. If you check this box, then combustion becomes a recommended form. Questions about pest infestation, and 2 questions about how the plant weatherization work will result in something that may become a potential health and safety concern later on. So after you have filled in these 3 forms, and I have already checked a few so that all the forms are recommended, you click on the view guidance form, and you are given these. The audit will generate these recommendations and why it is generating these recommendations. And these will say recommended, optional, or not applicable. based on your inputs on these three forms. For more, right now, all the checkboxes or data input I have entered so far to make every form recommended so that I can fill in all the information. And this is the description. Among all these forms, from mold and moisture to pest infestation, these forms are recommended based on your inputs. The safety and ventilation forms are always recommended. They do not require any screening questions. It's recommended that you go through these two forms and fill in the information. So now I'll go into all the detailed survey forms one by one. On the mold and moisture, one important point. Here you have to fill in apply. If you have completed this form and first time viewing the guidance, you must say apply or OK, and then these icons will be updated. If you have made any changes, these will be updated. So you have to click OK or apply. On the mold and moisture form, this form is recommended if any checkbox on the observation form under mold and moisture, which is right here, it's checked, or you have the checkbox on the observation form, on this form, where it says that the plant weatherization work will decrease house infiltration rate. This is checked. If this is checked or any of this is checked, then this form is recommended. In this form, you have two tabs, evidence of issue and source identification. On the first tab, evidence of issue, there is a table, and you can enter your observations in the first four column of checkboxes for different space and components in the house. Spaces like attic, bathrooms, kitchen, laundry rooms, and such. Components such as heating system, cooling system, ducts, appliances, etc. You can enter if you see any visible mold, any moisture damage, water or dampness in the space, if you find any condensation or high humidity in the space, or if you sense any odor, musty odor, if occupant report of anything like that. The fourth column of check boxes prompts you to go to the source identification form. So for any space for which you have identified any of the evidence, you must go to the source identification form to identify the sources of why these problems are occurring, and come back to this form and check this box. If you try to save this form without checking that you have completed, you have identified the sources, then and try to save the form, you'll get a warning that you have not completed this. So after you have checked this, you can save the form. So first you fill in these columns about what you see, your observation, and then you go to the source identification form. And so on source identification form, all the check boxes are grouped by spaces or components on this column, and there are many check boxes. You can enter your observation about the attic. You can indicate what sources of the problem you see on the attic, in the bathroom, in the kitchen, other indoor elements, plumbing systems and equipment, basement or crawl space, house exterior, side drainage. So whatever you see on these spaces and components, you can check the appropriate checkboxes. If there is anything that you see which is not covered by these checkboxes, you can always click on the other and describe your observation. You click apply. If you click apply, and it says that you have to go back to the evidence of issue form and check the appropriate box here. After you have completed information on both tabs, and you have filled the checkbox for which you have indicated a problem, then you are done with this form. If you hit apply, the form is saved, and you can continue to the next form. You can enter comments for individual space and components, or a general comment, an overall comment about the this issue, or anything you want to enter. On the lead form, this form is recommended, means you will see a yellow icon if the year built on the audit form is before 1978, and the two check boxes on the observation forms under lead, that the housing unit is designated for elderly and disabled person, and if it is a zero dwelling unit, those are unchecked, and the check box on the observation form that the plant weatherization work will disturb paint. This is here, this checkbox, plant weatherization will disturb, work will disturb paint on the interior surface. If this is checked, then this form will be recommended. On the lead form, there are two field sets. First is housing type or funding source, and the other one is evidence of issue. On the first, on this evidence of issue, you can your inputs will decide how severe is the problem, or if there is a substantial disturbance, the lead could be a concern for the crew or for the occupants, and it will say certain rules needs to be followed when performing the weatherization work, and you need to hand out certain guidance to occupants so that they are aware of the problem. So on this field set, for the interior and exterior surface, first you indicate whether the surface will be disturbed, and then these three columns, these decide how substantial is the disturbance, whether the disturbance exceed area limits given in footnote number 1, whether it involves demolition or window replacement, or whether it involves prohibited paint removal practices listed in footnote 2. So if any of these check boxes are checked, that means there is substantial disturbance to the surface, and something needs to be done for that. Then there is a drop-down where you can indicate whether lead testing was conducted or not. If it is what was conducted, was it positive, means there was lead detected, or if it is negative, there was no lead. Refer to footnote 3 and 4 regarding the lead testing methods and guidance for determining if testing should be performed. Then these checkboxes are telling how big the disturbance is and whether something needs to be done. This set of checkbox is for audit to determine which exact set of rules the auditor needs to follow, whether it should be an EPA set of rules, or HUD set of rules, or weatherization lead safe practices rules. So based on these check boxes, the specific guidance that you need to the specific handout that you need to give to the occupants and which exact set of rules you need to follow, that is determined by these three sets. And that's all about the lead form. After you have filled the form, say apply or OK. The next form is radon form. The radon form is recommended if any checkbox on the observation form under radon, that radon is detected in the neighborhood or radon previously detected in the house, any of this is checked, or on the audit form, if your county is in the radon zone 2 or 3. If your county is in radon zone 1 and your observation form says that the planned weatherization work will decrease house infiltration rate, then the audit determines that there is a potential that low level of radon, it can build up to a higher level. So in that case also, you will see this radon form recommended. If any of this checkbox is checked, if your county is in zone 2 or 3, or if your county is in zone 1 and your house is going to be air-tightened, then this form is recommended. So these are the three conditions. On this form, there are two field sets. One is the evidence of issue, and the other is to indicating the source of radon, the radon entryways. On the first, you can describe whether you have which assessment approach you want to follow. Do you want to test for radon before and after weatherization, or only after weatherization, or do you not want to do any radon assessment? This table is for entering the radon measurements. Since I have selected, based on what option you select here, the fields will be enabled or disabled. If you select test in and test out, you can enter both information, the radon levels for one or both. If you select post-weatherization test only, then only one. This row will be enabled. If you select none, then there is nothing to fill out. After you have made your selection here, the row will be enabled. If you have test performed, then select this checkbox. If test is not performed, then don't check this checkbox, and these fields will be grayed out. They are not editable. And you will get a recommendation that you said that you want to do post-weatherization test. So conduct this radon test and come back to this audit and fill in this portion. On this, after you check this checkbox, enter the radon level. It could be anything. The audit will say it's an issue if the value entered in this is above 4 picocurie per liter. This is the unit for radon level. So if you enter based on this value, the audit says what exactly to do to mitigate the issue. The rest of the fields are optional. It's only for information purpose. You can select radon sampling device. You can enter date installed, and you can enter sampling duration, how many days of testing was conducted to get to this number. Like, how did you get this radon measurement? Here, you should also enter whether there is an existing radon reduction system. If there was nothing, or if there is an active radon reduction system or a passive radon reduction system. Active when you have, I think, fans to pull out gases from the foundation, from the ground. Passive is where it does not have a fan. And this information is used because to generate recommendations, because I think VAP and probably HUD or EPA document, they ask you to refer this radon mitigation work to some other agency, or probably they do not pay for radon mitigation. So this information, whether you have already existing system, then you are allowed to do something with that system. But if there is nothing and there is a problem, if the level is high, then you need to refer to another agency to mitigate radon. The next field set is about source identification, where you can describe the condition in the foundation, in the floor, or the foundation walls, if there are cracks or penetrations, which are the potential radon entryways. If there is something that is not listed, you can always check this checkbox and describe your observation here. So we have covered almost half the forms. If there is any question, you can ask, or if Mark, you have any comment.
All good?
Good so far.
We're all good. Yeah.
All right, Mark, anything you think I missed so far?
No, you're good.
All right, okay. So we say cancel because I already have some information that I would like to be there. On the asbestos form, this form is recommended if the year built is before 1990 on the audit form. If it is before 1990, that means the audit will recommend this form, filling this form. On the asbestos form, there is only one field set, this big table, to enter the evidence, your observations about the asbestos containing material. There could be several sources of asbestos. If the house was built before 1990, there could be several sources of asbestos. And we have grouped those sources in three categories. First one is attic and wall, attic insulation, wall insulation, or wall siding. There's a group, health and safety components, heating system components, which is mainly insulation, gaskets, and such. And there are building materials, which could be potential sources of asbestos. The next column is where you indicate the presence of asbestos. It's a drop-down field where you can indicate whether you have found that this is an asbestos-containing material, or if it is not, or if you're unsure. And you can enter this information for anything you found in the house, any component. There's a footnote too, which says how your selection unsure is interpreted by the audit. For all source currently identified as unsure, the presence of asbestos will be assumed to be yes in the homes built prior to 1990 because of its original construction or possible renovation performed between 1930 and 1989. If these sources are also damaged or will be disturbed, which is the next set of the next two columns. If it is also damaged or will be disturbed during weatherization or other activity, then it's better to have that component tested for asbestos by a qualified professional to verify that it is the asbestos is not present, because abatement is much more costlier than testing. So if the house is old and you are not sure, but you know that that component is already damaged or will be disturbed, then it's better to have it tested. It may end up being less costlier than trying to do the abatement. So after you have made your selection, check which ones you see is already damaged. There is a definition of what damaged means in the EPA guidance. If it is unraveling, frayed, breaking apart, then it's already damaged. If it will be disturbed during weatherization activity, then you use these check boxes to indicate that. You can enter any comment you want for any of these comments or generic comments for the entire form. And after you have completed the form, you can apply to just save the form or OK to save the form and exit. I'll say cancel because I've already completed the data which I wanted to save. The next form is formaldehyde or VOC. This form is recommended if there is an attached garage indicated on the audit form right here, or if there are certain health and safety symptoms checked on the health concern form, or if any of the check boxes on the observation forms under formaldehyde and VOCs is checked, or if this checkbox, whether plant weatherization work would use or install VOC emitting products, if this is checked, any of any of these checkboxes are checked, or there's an attached garage, or any certain health concerns are checked, then this form gets recommended. On this form, there are two main field sets. One is evidence of issue, and then there is this source identification. On the evidence of issue, if you have if formaldehyde sampling was performed, so that it was performed and you have the measurement, you can enter that. And on this on this field set, you can enter your observations. We have the items grouped in 4 categories. First is VOC sources in house or attached garage, if something is stored which could be contributing to formaldehyde and VOC emissions. Other sources or conditions like there is evidence of smoking in the house, there is ozone producing air cleaning equipment, or there are certain composite wood products installed in the last year that may still be emitting VOCs. Conditions in the attached garage which may cause some of the emissions from garage, they can transfer like gaps or leaks or some kind of short circuit between garage and the house, which can bring the emissions from garage to the house. And then there is a list of items to identify products that will be used or installed during weatherization that may emit formaldehyde or VOCs, and you can identify those here. If there is something that's not listed, you can always use other to indicate that. This information, this measured formaldehyde concentration, this is used to generate an additional recommendation if the value is above 0.75 ppm. If you have entered this value and if it is above 0.75 ppm, the audit will generate a recommendation to defer weatherization until the sources of formaldehyde are eliminated and the level is reduced to below 0.75. If the value is below 0.75 but above 0.1, but you do not see any evident source, any obvious sources of asbestos, that means all the check boxes are unchecked, but the value you measured is above 0.1 ppm. That means there is something, but it may require some professional to identify the sources. Then you will get a recommendation to hire a qualified professional to identify the sources and perform remediation. If it's an optional field, if nothing was done but you have sources identified, then you indicate them and complete this form. Say apply and OK to save the form. The next form is combustion form. It's a little bit involved. And the combustion form is recommended only if you're in the observation form, you have indicated that there is a combustion appliance, a space heating, a water heating, or a cooking appliance in the house. Only then this form is recommended. On the combustion form, there are two tabs, safety inspection and performance testing. The safety inspection, there is this big table with first 4 rows where you describe describe the combustion appliance, and then 4 groups where you indicate if there is any safety related concern. For the first 4 rows, the first one is appliance. It's a drop-down menu where you can select your appliance. It could be furnace, boiler, space heater, fireplace, water heater, stove, clothes dryer. I have selected furnace, water heater, and a stove. You can enter additional combustion appliances if there are any. The next row is where you enter the fuel. The options are natural gas, propane, oil, kerosene, wood, coal, or other. Select whatever is applicable. Indicate whether the appliance is vented or unvented. We have vented furnace, vented water heater, and vented stove. You may have a space heater that is unvented. And then finally, you indicate the expected post-retrofit status, whether it's going to remain in the house, it's going to be removed, or replaced. If it's going to be remained, then the next set of these safety inspection questions, these needs to be filled in. These check boxes needs to be, these inspections needs to be conducted to specify whether these problems are there or not, whether these safety conditions are there or not. If it's going to be removed and replaced, then you need not enter because it's anyways going to be replaced, and there will be a new one which will be safe for installation. There is a footnote 1. Footnote 1 says again the same thing. Only appliances with an expected post-retrofit status of remain require further inspection or testing. Inspection and testing of appliances that will be removed or replaced is optional. The next set of observations are general safety observations. These apply to all appliances that you have indicated so far. Then vented combustion appliances, and they are enabled only for those for which you have checked that they are vented. The next set of appliances these set of questions are for solid fuel combustion appliances. So if you have selected your fuel, wood, coal, or other, then you will have this filled in. For example, you have a fireplace, which is wood. It's vented, and it's going to remain. You have these set of check boxes shown up, and you indicate whether you see any observation, any safety observation. Similarly, unvented or vent-free combustion appliances, if vented is not checked, will show up. And then two safety observations about stove. If your appliance is stove, then you will get that checkboxes enabled for that column. So that's about the safety inspection form. And then you have to go to the performance testing, where you enter the measurements. There are three field sets. First is background measurements, where you enter the outdoor temperature, carbon monoxide outside the house and inside the house. There is some guidance. The second set is about oven measurements. What's the CO level in the flue gases in the oven vent? You can enter as measured or air-free measurements. There are different threshold limits. If your measurement is above that threshold, then a recommendation will be generated. And then this third field set, which has a table, you need to enter information, measurements here only for those appliances that are vented. So if you have appliances on this tab and you've indicated that these appliances are vented, these checkboxes are checked, those appliances will automatically be filled in, telling you that these are the appliances, and you need to fill in the measurements, the combustion appliance zone measurements for these vented appliances. So these are read-only fields. These are simply the information from the safety inspection tab, and this is the place where you enter your observation measurements. For each appliance, first enter the combustion appliance zone, whether it is located in the basement, garage, living space, any closet, or some other place. Then you do your testing based on, I think this is, we used everything based on what EPA says, and I think that uses BPI standard. So follow that standard and do the measurements. First field is gas depressurization limit. For this, there's a footnote 1 which says that based on your venting conditions, these are the limits. So you read the value based on the what you observe about the venting condition, and you enter that value in this box. Then you do measurements, pressure measurements, gas baseline pressure with reference to outdoors, gas worst case pressure with reference to outdoors. After you have entered these two numbers, the net worst case depressurization is calculated by the audit. This number is compared with this depressurization limit to generate a recommendation if your pressure in the gas is enough. If it is If it is enough to not transfer the flue gases to the other living spaces. So your gas pressure will be negative enough to so that your flue gases do not go to your living spaces. So this number is compared with your limit, the gas depressurization limit. Then you enter carbon monoxide in the gas, and you do this, like you continuously monitor your carbon monoxide in the gas. If at any point the value is above 35 ppm, then you need to stop the test. There is a footnote, footnote number 3, which says, monitor gas CO continuously during combustion testing and record highest value. Discontinue testing if CO level exceeds 35 ppm. And you will also be reminded if as soon as you enter 35, above 35, I think, you will be reminded then and there that you need to discontinue testing because it's unsafe even for you to. The next set is where you enter the appliance measurements. During the worst case depressurization that you have maintained, measure the spillage time in seconds, measure the draft in flue, and minimum, that's it. The minimum draft pressure is calculated by the audit based on the outdoor air temperature you have entered here. This draft pressure is compared with your draft in the flue and it generates recommendation. If it finds that your worst case under worst case depressurization, the draft in the flue is not negative enough compared to your minimum draft pressure, that means some measures need to be taken. So the flue gases, there is no spillage. The flue gases do not come out of the vent. They go directly straight up to the vent. And then you enter CO in the undiluted flue gas under that condition. You can enter as measured or air-free, and there are threshold limits programmed. And these numbers, this input is compared with that threshold limit to generate the recommendations. This yellow is basically telling you that there is something where you can select the option. And that is all about the combustion safety form. Mark, anything or anyone has a question?
I'm just guessing that those pre-entered combustion action levels are based on the BPI legacy standards?
Yes. So whatever the EPA said, I think EPA document mentions BPA standard, but I think the BPI standard has updated. We are still following following the BPI standard that the EPA document has referred to. Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, we'll check that. Thank you.
They took out that gas depressurization table.
Yeah, I know it. So I don't think it's 1200 standards.
Well, it's following the old standards, but yeah, with the new 1200 standards, the gas depressurization, there is no limit anymore because setting a limit automatically failed the job when it went over that limit, whereas the system is still drafting just fine. So,
okay. Yeah, so the new one does not. Is that what you're saying?
Okay. Yeah. Well, we can clarify that for our purposes.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Mark, anything to add here? If I missed something, it's a pretty long form.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I think, nope, I don't remember anything. So I think you covered it all.
Right. Okay, so then after we have completed this form, we save the form, go to the next form. It's pest infestation.
Let me just interrupt here. So I was looking at our design manual, and I'm specifically looking at page 29. If you want to write that down. Remember, I told you in the design manual we show you all the logic that we use to make all these decisions, and it looks like the CO and the flu, there's limits of either 100 or 200, then a recommendation gets generated. I think it's 100 as measured or 200 air-free seems to be the cutoff for a furnace. For a stove, it's 200 or 400. So, Minnie's example had 1,200. That was not the action limit. I'm looking. So again, on all these little questions, if you look in the design manual, you can see what the thresholds are that generate a recommendation.
Yeah, we're more or less trying to make sure we're clear on what standard these are actually based on. You know, whether it's current or we need to be aware of each update. So that's good. As we determine that, we'll share that.
Okay. All right, Minnie.
Okay. On the pest infestation form, this form is recommended if any checkbox on the observation form about pest infestation is checked. The first one is the evidence of existing problem if the occupant reports of pest infestation. The second checkbox is about the conditions that may be that could be an existing problem or that may lead to a future problem. Like if there is evidence of pest harborage conditions, if the conditions are such that it may attract pests, it may cause, if not now, in future. So there are these two check boxes. If any of these two check boxes are checked, then this form is recommended. There is one health symptom on the health concern form, which is I think asthma. If you have selected that the asthma symptoms are present in one or more occupants, then that information is used for generating the description as to why that form is recommended. It won't affect. It won't, if this is unchecked, it won't say that this form is not required. It will still say the form is recommended. The description will word it differently based on whether there are vulnerable occupants. The symptoms is present. The pest infestation form has two tabs: evidence of issue and source identification. On the first tab, you enter the observation about infestation of different pests and whether you see any pest-contaminated materials in the house. And on the second tab, there are check boxes where you can enter sources which can lead to pest infestation. We have grouped items under pest harborage conditions, food and water sources that can attract pests, or there are pest entryways. On the evidence of issue form, for each type of pests, you enter the degree of infestation. There is a drop-down box. You can enter whether there is no infestation or occasional, moderate, or persistent or severe infestation. You enter this checkbox if you feel that the mitigation is required before weatherization because it is unsafe even for the crew, or weatherization is difficult until the mitigation is conducted. You enter the degree of contamination. If you see any pest contaminated materials, you can enter the degree of contamination. The options are none, moderate, and severe. If the removal of pest contaminated material is required, cleanup is required before weatherization, you indicate the checkbox. The recommendation generated will be based on what you have described here, what you have entered here. This column of checkboxes is same as in mold and moisture. This prompts you to go to the source identification tab and identify the sources. And until this checkbox is checked for any pest for which you have entered any degree of infestation or degree of contamination, if this is unchecked, then you will get a warning if you try to save this form that you need to go to the source identification form, check whatever your observations are, come back to this form, and check this particular checkbox to say that you have covered both the forms. There is another column of checkboxes where you indicate whether occupants have been using harmful pesticides or rodenticides in the house to get rid of the problem. If anything harmful is being used, you need to indicate it here, and recommendation will be generated based on your checkboxes, like educating the client about not discontinue using that kind of chemicals, harmful chemicals. You can refer to the footnotes for infestation, pest contaminated materials, and the other column headings. And that's all about the pest infestation form. We have covered this before already. The three groups, all the items. The other form, if there is an observation which is not covered, you can always check other and describe your observation. Next form is safety. Safety is always recommended. It is not dependent on any of the inputs in the general survey form. Safety items are grouped in 4 tabs: general safety, structural safety, fire safety, and electrical safety. Under general safety, there are 3 groups: general injury prevention related observation. If you see presence of the hazard, you select appropriate checkboxes. If you have indicated that you have elderly or disabled in the house on the audit form, if you have selected that there are elderly present in the house or children present in the house, then you indicate whether these hazards are present for elderly and children. Under structural tab, we have items grouped by under roof, walls, windows, doors, stairs, floor, porch, patio, or balcony. If any of these observations, these hazards are present, indicate them here. You can use the comment box to describe anything you want. Under fire safety, these are basically for indicating whether these smoke alarms, CO alarms, or fire extinguishers are located in appropriate locations or not, whether they are working properly. If not, you mark the appropriate checkboxes. Whether their operation is, if it is unfamiliar to occupants, the operation of fire extinguisher, you can mark these. The recommendation will be generated on replacing these alarms or installing a fire extinguisher or educating the clients on how to use this. There is another set of items about stored flammable products, about clearance around heating systems, or any other fire hazard or code compliance issue. You can describe whatever your observation is. The next set is next tab is electrical safety hazards, where we have two field sets. First is about the knob and tube wiring, and the second one is other electrical hazard. In the first table, you can specify knob and tube wiring is present in which spaces. If you have selected that the knob and tube wiring is present in certain space or component, then these set of checkboxes will be enabled, where you can describe whether it is already unsafe, if the installation is planned for that component or space, and if the code allows insulating over knob and tube wiring. These set of recommendations, set of checkboxes are used for generating recommendations for electrical safety. Indicate other hazards you see in the house related to electrical safety. And that's all about the safety related survey. The last form is ventilation form. Ventilation form is always recommended, and it allows you to check compliance with ASHRAE 62.2 standard and provides recommendation on how you can achieve compliance. It has a number of field sets: general information, clothes dryer exhaust information, then a place to enter information about kitchen and bath exhaust fans, and finally a place to enter blower door measurements, to enter infiltration information. The first is general information. First is the checkbox to indicate whether if the exception to the ASHRAE 62.2 applies to the dwelling unit. There is a footnote explaining what it means when there is an exception. It says if the authority having jurisdiction determines that window operation is a locally permissible method of providing ventilation, and at least one of the following conditions is met. The building has no mechanical cooling and is in zone 1 and 2 of IECC climate zone map. There is a climate zone map in this document. Yeah. And you see zone 1 and 2. You need not go to that document. You just click on this link, and you will be presented with the counties that are located in climate zone 1 and 2. If your county is any of these, then and the other conditions are met, then you can select the check boxes. If it has no mechanical cooling and zone 1 and 2, or the building is thermally conditioned for human occupancy for less than 876 hours per year, which is like one-tenth of the year, then you can get exception. You don't have to comply with that. If you this checkbox, then you don't have to comply with that standard. Then the next field is where you can select which ASHRAE standard you want to check compliance with. Right now we have 2010 and 2013. We will be adding another option, 2016, because I think most of the states and even weatherization, WAP, they have adopted that standard. So we need to soon add this option, and that will be added in, I think, after next few months. Next set is read-only field, which is just showing the fields which are pertinent to ventilation calculation. All this information is already entered by you on the audit form. The weather state and weather station, the conditioned floor area, ceiling height, number of floors, number of bedrooms and bathrooms, and number of occupants. All these inputs are used for ventilation, for calculating the whole house ventilation requirement. The next three set of checkboxes is where you describe about the cloth dryer exhaust, whether the dryer is present, whether it is vented to outdoors, and whether it is not vented to outdoors. That's when you check this checkbox, and whether vent has restriction or lint buildup. That's just the check boxes, and it will recommend. It will generate respective recommendation. This information is not used for ventilation calculation. It's only for generating the recommendation, one-on-one recommendation. The next set is this table is a little bit involved, where you enter kitchen and bath exhaust information. You enter your observation as well as some measurements. In this table, you have you can list observations for bathrooms and kitchens. Select as many bathrooms as present in the house. I've selected 3 for this house. After you have selected which spaces are present, you specify whether that space has an operable window. There is a footnote, number 1, which says, check only if the authority having jurisdiction determines that window operation is a locally permissible method of providing local exhaust. So if this checkbox is checked, then you will get that window credit for that space. When the audit calculates exhaust deficit in kitchen and baths, these check boxes means that you get credit for that, for having a window in that space. If the authority having jurisdictions says that it is the window, credit is allowed. This set of columns is where you enter information about the exhaust fan in each of these spaces. You enter whether the fan is present, whether it is vented to outdoors, and there's a footnote about what vented to outdoor means. If it's not vented into any other space, any crawl space, attic, or within a wall, if it is vented to outdoors, then you check this checkbox. And then you enter the flow rate in CFM, and there is a footnote about what is allowed to be entered, what needs to be entered in this. If you have measured it using certain devices, air flow measuring devices, you can enter the value. And there is some other text about whether your duct meets certain criteria. enter 0 if the flow rate cannot be measured or cannot be assumed based on the nameplate of the fan, nameplate airflow rating of the fan. So if it cannot be measured, you cannot get credit for that, and you should not be entering any flow rate. If you have measured it, or if there is a nameplate rating, then you enter that fan flow rate. The next column is where you select the compliance option. The two options are, first, whether you want to replace the fan or whether you want that deficiency in exhaust in your whole building ventilation requirement. So, and I'll explain after I've completed this form how these are factored in the ventilation calculation. So you select which space is present, whether it has operable windows, whether exhaust fan is present and is vented to outdoors, what's the fan flow rate, and whether that fan will be replaced. You will install a new fan, or whether to include that deficiency in the whole house ventilation calculation. Then finally you enter the blower door measurement, and you can enter pre-weatherization, target, or post-weather, or you can enter all of them and select which one you want for the audit to use to calculate the whole house ventilation requirement. So that's all about the form. Now I'll just explain a little bit, and there's not enough time. If you want, I can explain, or I can just go ahead on just wrapping it up. Just 3 minutes left. Mark or others?
Well, so first of all, we're real close to 12 o'clock.
Yeah.
We can go on a few extra minutes because I think we're real close to being done with what we wanted to go over, in which case we won't have to talk tomorrow. So can we go over a few minutes? Is that okay with you all?
Yeah, that's fine. Essentially, I think what we're going to do is kind of have a debrief here after we close and maybe communicate some questions that we have with you that we, perhaps could address tomorrow if they exist, and we'll keep some time open. But we're comfortable if you want to continue and wrap things up, and then, like I say, we'll communicate with you this afternoon.
Sure, that'll be great. So
thank you.
Let me just add one thing that Minnie, and then we'll get back to this question, is so with the new weatherization, their new WPN 17-something, their new guidance on health and safety. One thing that we definitely have to do is put in the 2016 62.2 version of that calculation into the audit. And then the other thing that we need to do is kind of just re-look through their guidance and see if it changes any of our logic that we built into the audit where it dealt with weatherization, or those little notes that we talked about on the recommendation forms. We might have to change some of those based on the new guidance. So in the next few months, we're going to go through that new 17-whatever guidance and see how it impacts the audit and make the appropriate changes. But one of the biggest is we need to add the ASHRAE 62.2 2016 version here.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Minnie, and just explain then how that replace and stuff impacts the calculation. Minnie?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll briefly explain what exactly is factored in for calculating the whole house ventilation. So to calculate the whole house ventilation rate, all read-only fields about the dwelling, occupancy, weather station, and the kitchen and exhaust fan information and infiltration information. These are used. So it calculates the required ventilation based on the occupancy and conditioned area first, and then factors in any deficit in the kitchen and bathroom based on your inputs here. If you are going to replace the fan, or if there is no fan and you are going to install a fan, then the audit assumes that it's going to be code compliant and there is no deficiency in that space. If you say include in ventilation requirement, then that deficiency is factored in your ventilation requirement. And then it subtracts from that calculation the infiltration credit based on your blower door measurement, and dwelling height and weather factor. For kitchen and bathroom, for each kitchen and bathroom present, if the compliance, again, like I said, if it's replaced, then audit determines that there won't be any deficit. If it's include, then it will account for that. If the existing fan is vented to outdoors, and then you get some credit for the measured fan flow rate. It is in standard, it should be 50 CFM for bathroom and 100 CFM for kitchen. But if your fan flow rate is less than that, then the deficit will only be 50 minus 30 or 100 minus whatever fan flow rate you have entered. If the operable window checkbox is checked, then you get additional 20 CFM credit for each space which has a window. So your resulting the deficit could be much smaller than the 100 or 50 CFM requirement in that space. And this deficit is factored in when the calculation is performed. So that's all about how the ventilation rate is determined to comply with the standard.
I just heard a talk by a guy that so this becomes important whether you're going to replace an existing fan or include the deficit in the whole house ventilation requirement. That depending on how your numbers are coming out, and remember that I think WAP has this understanding that if the whole house ventilation is like 10 or 15 CFM, you don't really have to put a fan in then, because they kind of say that's close enough. So sometimes it's cheaper to install a new bathroom fan, and then you end up not having to install any whole house ventilation. So this idea of addressing the existing fans as opposed to putting it all into the whole house ventilation requirement can really change how you approach a house in the end and which is cheaper to do.
Okay.
So
we have completed all forms, and after all the forms are filled in, you click on the Create button, and that will generate the recommendations. If you first time click the Create button and no recommendation was already there, then this type of warning will not be shown. If I say yes, it will overwrite my previous recommendations, and now it is regenerating based on my inputs. Again, you have Mark has gone over this, I think, twice. So, Mark, do we need to reiterate? We have for each detailed survey form, we have different tabs. The numbers say how many recommendations are generated based on your inputs. You have recommendations, and you have to indicate whether it should be performed before weatherization, and you can indicate which party is going to implement that recommendation. And then you have some guidance which you can expand.
Yep, I think so. So basically, just on that, go back up to the top